Norway have just done something remarkable. 2-0 against Brazil in the round of 16, and it is one of the best performances of the entire tournament. Martin Odegaard is wearing the captain's armband for Norway, and he has just helped drag his country into a first-ever World Cup quarter-final. Their reward and their new challenge is England next Saturday in Miami. Sit with that for a second. Odegaard is not just playing well. He is captaining his country to a result against Brazil that almost nobody predicted. And the man reacting to it afterward is not some neutral pundit. It is Carlo Ancelotti, the Brazil manager, and a coach who knows Odegaard intimately from their time together at Real Madrid. Ancelotti did not talk about Odegaard's finishing or his dribbling. He talked about pressing. He said it was very difficult for his Brazil side to press high, because Norway kept so many players behind the ball and relied heavily on Odegaard to organise that structure. Think about what that means. The manager of Brazil, one of the most decorated coaches in the history of football, is telling the world's media that his team's attacking plan was disrupted specifically because of how Odegaard was directing Norway from deep. That is the moment we are starting from. Not a transfer rumour, not a training ground quote. A losing World Cup manager, live, in real time, explaining that Odegaard's control of the game is what beat him. Here is the problem. While Odegaard is doing this on the biggest stage in football, Arsenal currently have him listed for sale. That is not a rumour I am reading between the lines on. That is the real current situation at the club. Odegaard is on the list of players the club is willing to consider offers for this summer at the exact moment he is captaining Norway to a first-ever World Cup quarter-final and being praised by one of the most respected managers in the world. If that decision stands, Arsenal risk losing their captain, their creative core, and the player an opposing World Cup manager just credited with breaking his own game plan, all in the same transfer window. And Mikel Arteta, from what is being reported, does not want this. Arteta is against selling Odegaard, which means the pressure is now on the club itself to reverse a call that its own manager disagrees with. Before we go further into how deep this goes, and there is a lot more here, including a separate transfer situation involving a Newcastle midfielder that Arsenal have already tried and failed to sign once this summer, hit that subscribe button if you want the full picture on this. I break these situations down properly, fact by fact, no noise, no guessing. If you want deeper analysis on stories like this as they develop, this is the place for it. Now let us go through everything, piece by piece, because there is a lot to unpack, from 5 separate reactions circulating around this Odegaard moment, to 3 separate storylines about who Arsenal actually want this summer. The 5 voices. I want to start with the reactions that are floating around right now, because before we even get to the transfer questions, you need to understand exactly how much respect Odegaard is generating from people who are not exactly incentivized to hand out compliments for free. The first one comes from inside the Norway camp itself, sort of. It is Bruno Guimaraes talking about Odegaard, and here is exactly what was said. Quote, "I like him a lot. He is always good with the ball, he never feels pressure, he is always available to play 1-2 touches. I have played against him many times, so I know him well." End quote. Now think about who is saying this. Guimaraes is not a Norway teammate. He is a Newcastle player, a Brazilian international, someone who has lined up against Odegaard multiple times in the Premier League. When a rival midfielder, someone whose entire job on a football pitch is to stop players like Odegaard from getting time on the ball, tells you that Odegaard never feels pressure and is always available for 1 or 2 touch combinations, that is not flattery. That is a scouting report. That is an opponent describing exactly why he struggles to deal with you. The phrase "always available for 1 or 2 touches" is the single most telling part of that quote, because it describes a player who solves pressure before it even arrives, through movement and positioning, rather than a player who needs to dribble his way out of trouble. That is elite-level game intelligence, described by someone who has felt it firsthand. The second reaction is completely different in subject, but tells us something important about the wider tournament. Luis de la Fuente, the Spain manager, praised Mikel Merino after Merino came off the bench to score the winning goal for Spain against Portugal. De la Fuente's words were direct. He said Merino never lets them down, that Merino led Spain to their European Championship title, and that in the biggest moments, Merino always proves his presence. He went further, calling Merino a fantastic player in every sense of the word, and naming him among the best in the world in his position. Why does this matter for an Odegaard and Arsenal analysis? Because it shows the broader pattern here. This tournament is full of moments where Arsenal-connected players, whether current, former, or simply rumoured, are being singled out by international managers as difference makers. De La Fuente is not talking about potential. He is talking about a player who has already delivered a European Championship and is now delivering again from the bench at a World Cup. That is not projection. That is a track record being reaffirmed in real time, and it adds weight to the idea that Arsenal's connections to top-level international performers at both club and country level are consistently being validated by neutral, credible voices, not by fan pages trying to build hype. The third and fourth reactions shift us into pure transfer territory, and this is where we have to be very careful and very precise about what is confirmed and what is still just an early-stage situation. The first of these two says that Arsenal have been rebuffed in an initial inquiry for Bruno Guimaraes. I want to slow down on that word, rebuffed, because it tells you everything about where this stands right now. This is not a rejected bid. This is not a collapsed transfer. This is Arsenal testing the waters with an initial inquiry, and Newcastle, along with the player's own representatives, pushing back on that very first approach. The report adds that Guimaraes himself wants the move, which is a significant detail, because it tells us the resistance is coming from Newcastle's side, not the player's side. It also notes that Newcastle can ill afford another high-profile departure, having already lost significant faces from that squad, but that the club's own accountants may view any offer above £65 million as making financial sense. So here is the honest state of that situation. This is a rumour, an early-stage one, with a release valve. Arsenal want him. He wants to go. Newcastle said no to the opening inquiry. But there is a number, £65 million, where the financial logic inside Newcastle's own boardroom might start to outweigh the football logic of keeping him. That is not confirmation of a transfer. That is confirmation that the door is not fully shut, and that price is going to be the deciding factor, not sentiment. The second transfer-focused reaction lays out the bigger picture. Arsenal want to bring in 4 or 5 top-quality signings this summer. Not one panic buy. Not a single marquee name to keep the fans happy. 4 or 5. And the report is specific about the positions. Another striker, a left-sided forward, a midfielder, a centre-back or a full-back, and a goalkeeper. Read that list again slowly. That is not a club patching one hole. That is a club planning a genuine structural rebuild of the squad depth across almost every single position group. A left-sided forward lines up with the Trossard departure and the uncertainty hanging over Martinelli. A midfielder lines up directly with the Guimaraes interest. Another striker suggests the current options up top are not considered sufficient depth for a team defending a title. And a centre-back or full-back plus a goalkeeper tells you defensively, this club is not resting on what got them here. This is a summer of genuine, wide-scale reinforcement, not a summer of 1 or 2 headline deals. The fifth reaction takes us back to Odegaard, and it might be the most damning one of all if you are trying to justify selling him. Vinicius Jr., on the losing side of that 2-0 defeat to Brazil, said this, quote, "They moved very well, they controlled the game, as Odegaard always does, and we could not figure out the timing to press them and win the ball back." End quote. Think about the phrase "as Odegaard always does." That is not Vinicius reacting to one good performance. That is a player who has clearly watched Odegaard enough, whether from previous encounters or simply from knowing his reputation, to describe his control of matches as a known, expected, repeated quality. And again, just like with Ancelotti, the specific detail here is about pressing. Brazil could not find the timing to press and win the ball back. That is 2 separate voices from the same losing dressing room and coaching staff, independently identifying the exact same problem. Odegaard's control of tempo and structure is what broke their press. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern being confirmed from 2 different angles within the same 90 minutes. The Odegaard situation in full. Now let us bring this together properly, because this is the central issue of the entire summer for Arsenal. The facts, only the facts, are these. Odegaard captained Norway to their first ever World Cup quarter-final, beating Brazil 2-0 in the round of 16 in what is being described as one of the best performances of the whole tournament. Carlo Ancelotti, the Brazil manager and Odegaard's former manager at Real Madrid, specifically credited Odegaard's role in Norway's defensive structure and pressing resistance as the reason his own Brazil side struggled to break them down. Vinicius Jr. echoed that same point from inside the Brazil dressing room, saying Odegaard controlled the game as he always does, and that Brazil could not time their press correctly against him. At the same moment all of this is happening, Arsenal have Odegaard listed among the players available for sale this summer. Mikel Arteta is against that decision. The expectation, based on where things currently stand, is that Arteta needs to overrule that call internally if Arsenal are to keep their captain. There is no ambiguity in what is being said here. This is not a rumour about Odegaard leaving. It is a documented current situation where the club's own listing and the manager's own preference are in direct conflict, playing out at the exact moment external voices, including a rival World Cup winning manager, are publicly reinforcing why Odegaard is so difficult to replace. My own read on this, purely from what has been laid out, is that timing matters enormously here. If Arsenal were going to move Odegaard on quietly, the moment to do it would not be immediately after he has just delivered a historic result on the world stage, captained the team, and been singled out by name by an opposing manager for his tactical importance. Every single external data point right now argues against selling him. Every single piece of praise strengthens the case for keeping him. The only entity currently arguing for a sale is the list itself, and that list is apparently not aligned with what the man actually picking the team wants. There is also a wider context that cannot be ignored. Arsenal are already losing Leandro Trossard, who is set to join Besiktas. That is one departure from a title-winning squad already close to confirmed. Layer a Odegaard sale on top of that. At the same time, the club is also trying to strengthen 4 or 5 other positions, and you are not looking at a summer of controlled evolution. You are looking at a summer where the spine of a title-winning team is being dismantled while replacements are still just names on wish lists. The left-wing puzzle. This brings us to the second major storyline, and it connects directly to that Trossard exit. With Trossard heading to Besiktas and real uncertainty hanging over Gabriel Martinelli's long-term future at the club, Arsenal are, quite obviously, in the market for a new left-sided attacking option. 2 names are attached to this search: Morgan Rogers of Aston Villa and Bradley Barcola of Paris Saint-Germain. Let us deal with Rogers first, because the number attached to him is enormous. Aston Villa reportedly value him at around £130 million. If Arsenal were to meet that figure, it would represent a new record transfer for the club, surpassing anything they have paid before. That is a serious statement of intent if it happens, but right now it remains exactly that: a valuation and a long-term interest, not an agreed fee or a confirmed move. Barcola is the other name, and the detail worth focusing on is not just that Arsenal like him, but that he is reportedly open to the move himself. That detail matters because plenty of transfer stories die not because a club loses interest, but because a player has no genuine desire to leave. If Barcola is genuinely open to Arsenal, that removes one of the biggest possible obstacles before negotiations with Paris Saint-Germain even begin. What I find most interesting here is the suggestion that Arsenal are preparing files on both players, not choosing between them. If that is accurate, it tells you this is not a situation where Arsenal have identified one first choice and one backup. This looks more like a club exploring the possibility of strengthening that flank twice over, which would be an extraordinary outlay in one single position, but would also make total sense given they are potentially replacing both Trossard and, eventually, Martinelli in the same window. I will be clear about the uncertainty here, because it needs to be said plainly. Nothing about Rogers or Barcola is confirmed. These are stated interests, stated valuations, and stated willingness from the players involved. That is meaningfully different from an agreed transfer, and viewers should treat it with that level of caution. What we can say with confidence is that the need is real and confirmed, because Trossard's departure is treated as close to done, and Martinelli's situation is described as genuinely uncertain, not simply speculated about. The Guimaraes and Haaland angle. The final piece of this puzzle takes us back to Bruno Guimaraes, but through a completely different lens, his relationship with Erling Haaland. Guimaraes was asked about comments Haaland made ahead of Brazil's World Cup game against Norway, where Haaland had been positioning his own team as underdogs, a tactic he has apparently used before big games, including one before a match against France. Guimaraes did not let that pass quietly. He described Haaland as cunning, and explained exactly why. He said Haaland takes all the responsibility off his own team and puts it onto the opponent by talking that way before games. Guimaraes made a point of saying he does not care much about what people say, that football is decided on the pitch, 11 against 11, and that Brazil had to be smart and prepared for Norway's physical, direct approach through crosses and tall players. Why include this in an Arsenal-focused breakdown? Because it tells you something about the character of a player Arsenal have already made contact with this summer. This is not a passive personality. This is a player willing to publicly call out one of the most famous strikers in the world, by name, in the build-up to a major tournament game, and back it up with a calm, controlled explanation of exactly why he sees it that way. There is also a neat symmetry worth noting. Gabriel Magalhaes, Arsenal's own defender, is known for a very similar trait, willing to wind up opposition players before, during and after matches, and has a long-standing rivalry of his own with Haaland, right down to a moment where Haaland bounced a ball off Gabriel's head. If Guimaraes were to end up at Arsenal, the suggestion is that his mentality would slot in naturally alongside a player like Gabriel, who shares that same competitive edge. But again, Precision matters here. The transfer link itself remains exactly where we described it earlier, an initial inquiry that was rebuffed, with a financial threshold around £65 million potentially changing Newcastle's calculation. The personality profile is confirmed, through his own words. The move itself is not. So where does all of this leave Arsenal as this summer moves forward? The picture, built strictly from what has actually been said and reported, looks like this. Odegaard has just delivered one of the defining individual performances of the World Cup so far, captaining Norway into a first-ever quarter-final and drawing direct praise from an opposing World Cup winning manager for the exact way he controls games. That performance sits in direct tension with a club decision to list him for sale, a decision the club's own manager reportedly opposes. Separately, Arsenal are pursuing 4 or 5 signings across attack, midfield, defence and goalkeeper, with an initial approach for Bruno Guimaraes already rebuffed by Newcastle, though a path above £65 million may still exist. And on the left side of attack, with Trossard's exit close to confirmed and Martinelli's future genuinely unclear, both Morgan Rogers and Bradley Barcola remain in the conversation, with Barcola reportedly open to the move, though neither deal is agreed. Every thread in this story points toward the same conclusion. This is a squad in transition, being reshaped across multiple positions at once, while simultaneously needing to resolve the most sensitive decision of all, whether to keep the captain who just proved, on the loudest stage in world football, exactly why he should never have been on that list in the first place. That is where things stand. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss how this Odegaard decision actually gets resolved, and whether that Guimaraes number gets met. I will be back with the next update as soon as there is something confirmed to break down.